The Senate chamber of the Galactic Concord sat at the heart of Pinnacle of Reason, an orbital station so massive it had its own weather. Hundreds of species filled the curved rows of seats that rose like a bowl around the speaking platform. The air smelled of a dozen different atmospheres, filtered and blended so that everyone could breathe. Light shifted in soft waves across the ceiling, meant to calm. It did not calm anyone today. Draven Call sat in the small section marked for Earth's delegation. There were only 4 seats. Humanity had earned provisional membership 12 years ago, after first contact with a Velith trading ship near Jupiter. 12 years was nothing in galactic politics. Humanity was still the new species, still the unknown, still the one everyone watched from the corner of their eyes. Draven was not a soldier, he was a diplomat. Before the stars opened up, he had spent 20 years negotiating hostage situations, border conflicts, and civil wars across Earth. He was 53 years old. His hair was gray at the edges. His eyes were dark and still, the kind of eyes that watched everything and gave away nothing. He sat with his hands folded on the desk in front of him. He did not fidget. He did not whisper to his aides. He simply waited. The reason for today's session stood on the speaking platform below. High Arbiter Yulan Vor was a Velith. His species came from a world called Shimmer, a paradise planet with warm oceans, gentle winds, and no natural predators larger than a house cat. The Velith were tall, thin beings with exoskeletons that glowed in shifting patterns of blue and gold. They were beautiful. They were ancient. They had been part of the Concord for over 3,000 years, and Yulan carried that history like a crown. He was speaking now, and every word was sharp. "The matter before this Senate is simple," Yulan said. His voice was smooth, musical, the kind of voice that made other species lean in and listen. "We are discussing the future safety of this Concord, and that future depends on whether we are brave enough to address a truth that too many of us have been afraid to say out loud." He paused, his exoskeleton pulsed brighter. "Deathworld species are dangerous." A murmur ran through the chamber, not of disagreement, of agreement. Draven's aide, a young woman named Priya, leaned toward him. "Sir, he's going after us directly." "I know," Draven said quietly. "Let him." Yulan continued. He brought up a display, a rotating image of Earth, blue oceans, green land, white clouds. It looked peaceful from orbit. He zoomed in. He showed the predators, wolves hunting in packs across frozen plains, great white sharks cutting through dark water, crocodiles older than most galactic civilizations, lying still as stone before exploding into violence, venomous snakes, swarms of insects that could strip flesh from bone. "This," Yulan said, "is a Class 12 death world, one of the most hostile environments ever recorded, and these are the creatures that share it with humanity." He let the images hang in the air. "Now let me show you what humanity did on this world." The display changed. Wars, atomic explosions, cities burning, fields of the dead. He showed every ugly chapter of human history, one after another, without context, without mercy. The Senate watched in silence. Some species physically recoiled. "They did not merely survive their death world," Yulan said. "They became its greatest predator. They hunted everything. They fought everything. They even fought each other endlessly with increasing creativity and scale. And now, after only 12 years among us, they want full membership. They want fleet rights. They want colonization permits." He turned slowly, sweeping his gaze across the chamber. "I say no." Applause broke out, not from everyone but from many. The Cradle World species, those from gentle, safe planets, clapped and hummed and flashed their approval. They had always been uncomfortable with Deathworlders. Yulan was saying what they had been thinking for centuries. "I am introducing the Deathworld containment provision," Yulan announced. "It will restrict independent fleet command for all Deathworld species. It will require behavioral oversight committees to monitor their military activity. It will limit their colonization to pre-approved systems only. This is not punishment. This is safety. This is the Conquered protecting itself from its own worst instincts." More applause, louder now. Draven did not move. He picked up his stylus and made a small note on his tablet. His face showed nothing. Priya stared at him, waiting for some reaction, some anger. There was none. Across the chamber, in a section reserved for the Draven delegation, Senator Murexi Thal watched with very different eyes. She was old, older than most beings in the room. Her species was reptilian, born on a Class 9 death world called Ashfall. Her scales were dark green, cracked with pale scars that mapped a lifetime of violence and survival. Her eyes were gold with vertical slits, and they did not blink as Yulan spoke. She did not clap. She did not react at all. Her claws tapped slowly on the armrest of her chair, a quiet rhythm that only she understood. The session ended with Yulan receiving a standing ovation from nearly half the Senate. He walked off the platform glowing brighter than Draven had ever seen a Velith glow. He was proud. He was certain. He believed he had won. The human delegation filed out in silence. Priya walked beside Draven, furious. "We have to respond," she said. "He just painted us as animals in front of the entire galaxy." "Not yet," Draven said. When it matters." They walked through the curved corridor that connected the Senate wing to the diplomatic quarters. The walls were transparent, showing the stars outside. It was quiet here. Most delegations had already gone. A voice stopped them. "Human." Draven turned. Murexi Thal stood behind them. She was shorter than he expected, but wide, built like something that had been fighting gravity and predators since before it could walk. She studied him with those gold eyes for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You did not defend yourself," she said. "No," Draven agreed. "Why?" "Because he is not finished making his mistake." Muraxi's head tilted. The scars on her jaw caught the light. "You think his speech was a mistake?" "I think he just told every enemy of the conquered that he wants to chain up the only species willing to fight for it," Draven said. "That information has value. To the wrong people, it has a lot of value." Muraxi stared at him. Then slowly something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, Draven did not smile, but something close. Recognition. "You have done this before," she said. "Waited while someone louder destroyed themselves." Draven met her gaze. "I'm from Earth, Senator. Patience is how we used to hunt. We would follow our prey for days, walking, never stopping until it collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't need to be faster. We just needed to be the last one standing." Muraxi's claws stopped tapping. She looked at him the way one predator looks at another, not with threat, but with understanding. "I will be watching you, Ambassador Call," she said. "I hope so," Draven replied. She turned and walked away, her heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. Draven watched her go. Then he turned back to the stars outside the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the light of mapped systems, something was moving. He didn't know what yet, but he had learned a long time ago, on a planet full of things that wanted to kill him, that the silence before a crisis had a sound of its own. He could hear it now. 3 weeks passed after Yulan's speech, and the galaxy changed around humanity like water turning to ice. Trade agreements that had taken years to build were frozen overnight. The Pelari Grain Consortium canceled its contract with Earth's agricultural exports. The Tessic Technology Exchange Program sent a formal notice of indefinite suspension. On the news networks that connected 1,000 worlds, Yulan's words played on repeat. Commentators from Cradle World species praised his courage. Humanity was discussed like a weather event, dangerous, unpredictable, something to prepare for rather than speak with. Back on Earth, the reaction was fury. Politicians demanded Draven fight back. Military leaders wanted a show of force. Social media burned with outrage. The message from home was clear and loud: do something. Draven did nothing. Or at least, that was what it looked like. He stopped attending public Senate sessions. He canceled interviews. He declined invitations to diplomatic functions where, His staff knew he would be cornered and humiliated by Cradle World representatives looking to score points. Priya watched her boss retreat into his office like a man who had given up, and it made her angry. "The Pelari ambassador laughed at me in the corridor today," she told him one evening. "Actually laughed. She said humans would be on leashes within a year." Draven was reading something on his tablet. He did not look up. "What did you say back?" "Nothing, because you told me to say nothing." "Good." "It doesn't feel good, sir." Draven set the tablet down. He looked at her with those calm, dark eyes that had talked gunmen into surrendering and warlords into peace deals, back when the biggest stage was a continent and not a galaxy. "Priya, every person who has ever underestimated a human has done so because we let them. That is not weakness. That is the oldest strategy our species knows. We let the prey think it is safe. We let the predator think it has won. And then we show up at the moment they cannot afford to ignore us." "And when is that moment?" "Soon, I can feel it." He went back to his tablet. Priya left unconvinced. But Draven was not idle. He was building something, quietly and carefully, the way a spider builds a web in a dark corner where no one thinks to look. Every night he sent encrypted messages to 2 delegations. The first was the Draven. The second was the Gorath, a species of enormous, silicon-based pack hunters from a Class 11 Deathworld called Ironfall. The Gorath were 8 feet tall, gray-skinned, and built like boulders with legs. They spoke in deep rumbles that shook furniture. They had been conquered members for 500 years and had never once been thanked for the wars they had fought on the conquered's behalf. Both species responded to Draven's messages. Both were interested in what he had to say. Both had been watching Yulan's campaign with the cold patience of creatures who had learned, over generations, that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the most dangerous. Draven also reached out to 3 non-Deathworld species who had reasons of their own to distrust Yulan. The Quarren, whose trade routes were controlled by Velith tariffs. The Masari, whose petition for expanded territory had been blocked by Yulan's committee for 6 years. And the Holoth, a quiet species of deep-water beings who simply did not like bullies. These were not allies, not yet. But they were cracks in the wall Yulan was building, and Draven knew how to work with cracks. The most important work, though, was the file. Draven had requested access to the Conquered's military archives, 200 years of records covering every conflict, every border skirmish, every pirate raid, every existential crisis the galaxy had faced. The archives were public, technically, but so vast and poorly organized that no one had ever compiled them into a single coherent picture. Draven did. Night after night, he read reports written in languages his translator struggled with, cross-referenced casualty lists, mapped fleet deployments, and built a simple, devastating document. The document answered one question: when the galaxy was in danger, who actually fought? The answer was always the same: Deathworlders, every single time. The Draven had held the line during the Kethai's expansion 400 years ago, losing a third of their fleet to protect conquered space. The Gorath had broken the Sarathi pirate clans a century later, boarding their stations in hand-to-hand combat that Cradle World soldiers would not have survived. And in the 12 years since humanity had joined, human ships and human soldiers had responded to 9 separate emergency calls, more than any other species in that time. The Cradle World species had funded the wars. They had voted for the wars, but they had not fought them, not once. Draven saved the file and encrypted it. It was not a weapon yet, but it would be. On the 22nd day after Yulan's speech, Muraxi Thal visited Draven in his quarters. She came alone, which was unusual for a senator of her rank. She sat in the chair across from his desk, her heavy tail curling around the chair leg, and studied the room with those golden eyes. "Your office is very plain," she said. "I don't need much." "No, your kind never does. That is what makes you unsettling." Draven offered her water. She accepted. They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable silence of two people who did not need to fill the air with noise. "I have been thinking about what you said," Murexi told him. "About patience, about following prey until it falls." "Persistence hunting," Draven said. "Yes, my people have a similar tradition. On Ashfall there is a predator called the Vorax. It is faster than us, stronger, better armored. But we learned that if we chased it long enough it would overheat. Its body could not cool itself while running, so we would chase it for hours under the burning sun until it simply stopped, and then we would kill it." She looked at him. Yulan does not know what it means to be chased. He comes from a world where nothing chases anything. He thinks strength is a speech. He thinks power is a vote. "And you know different," Draven said. "I know that power is the ability to endure longer than your enemy, and I know that you know this too." She leaned forward. "What are you building, Ambassador?" "A truth. Truths are dangerous. Only to those who have been lying." Murexi studied him for a long moment, then she stood. At the door she stopped and looked back. "Yulan has hunted with words his entire career. He has attacked species who could not strike back. He has built his power on the fear of things he has never faced." Her gold eyes caught the light. "But he has never been hunted himself. He does not know what that feels like." She left. Draven sat alone in his office. The stars outside his window were cold and countless. He pulled up the Concord's early warning network on his screen, a habit he had developed in his first week on the station. Most diplomats never looked at military channels. Draven always did, because he had learned long ago that the world never warned you before it tried to kill you. You had to be watching. Tonight he saw something. A small alert flagged low priority by the automated systems. A Velith colony called Shimmering Reach in a border system 3 jumps from the station had missed its scheduled communication check-in. The system had logged it as a probable technical malfunction. Draven stared at the alert for a long time. He opened a secure channel to his intelligence contact on Earth, a woman named Director Seentz, who ran deep space threat analysis for the United Nations Space Command. "Tell me about Shimmering Reach," he said. There was a pause. Then Seentz's voice came back, tight and careful. "We picked up the same gap, but we also picked up something else. There is a neutrino signature at the edge of that system that matches Wraith Swarm activity." Draven's blood went cold. The Wraith Swarm, a hive-minded predatory species from the deep void between galaxies, biomechanical, relentless. They consumed worlds. No conquered fleet had ever successfully driven them back. They simply arrived, devoured, and moved on. "How sure are you?" Draven asked. 70%, rising." Draven closed the channel. He sat still for a full minute, processing. Then he opened 2 new channels, one to Earth Fleet Command, one to Murexi Thal. "Senator," he said when Murexi answered, "I need to meet with you and the Gorath delegation, tonight." "Why?" "Because the galaxy is about to learn what Yulan's containment provision actually costs." The confirmation came at dawn, station time. Shimmering Reach was gone. Not destroyed in the way a war usually destroyed things, with wreckage and debris and distress signals fading into static. Gone in the way that only the Wraith Swarm could manage. The planet's surface had been stripped. Its oceans were dark. Its atmosphere was thinning, pulled apart by biomechanical harvesters the size of mountains that clung to the planet like parasites on a dying animal. 18 million Velith civilians had lived there. The automated distress beacon had triggered too late. By the time anyone heard it, there was no one left to rescue. The Senate was called into emergency session. The chamber, which had been so full of confidence and applause 3 weeks ago, was now full of fear. Delegates spoke in hushed voices. Some species had pulled their representatives entirely, fleeing back to their home systems. The empty seats were impossible to ignore. Yulan Vor stood on the speaking platform, and for the first time in his long career, he did not glow with confidence. His bioluminescence was dim, flickering in uneven patterns that the Velith could not always control, patterns that meant stress, confusion, fear. He gripped the podium with thin fingers and addressed the Senate. "The conquered fleet has been mobilized," he said. "Admiral Theska is leading a task force of 47 ships to intercept the swarm before it reaches the Valan and Sarai systems." He said it like it was a solution, like saying the words would make them true. But Draven, sitting in his small section with Priya beside him, knew better. He had spent the night reading everything the Conquered had on the Wraith swarm. The reports went back 600 years. The pattern was always the same. The swarm arrived. Fleets were sent. Fleets were destroyed. The swarm fed and moved on when there was nothing left to consume. Admiral Theska was a Pelari, a cradle-world species of tall, willowy beings who were brilliant at logistics and terrible at violence. Her fleet was made up almost entirely of cradle-world crews. Their ships were fast, well-designed, and beautiful. They had won simulated exercises for decades, but they had never faced an enemy that did not respond to communication, that did not negotiate, that did not stop. The fleet engaged the swarm 14 hours after deployment. Draven watched the battle feed from his office, along with Priya and a small team of human military advisors who had been quietly attached to his staff. The feed was delayed by minutes due to distance, but the story it told was clear. Admiral Theska ordered her fleet into a standard containment formation, a wide arc meant to surround and compress the enemy into a smaller area where concentrated fire could destroy them. It was textbook, it was elegant, and it was useless. The Wraith swarm did not behave like a fleet. It behaved like a living thing. The biomechanical ships, if they could even be called ships, twisted and reformed, splitting apart and reconnecting like cells dividing. They flowed around the containment arc like water around stones. 2 Conquered cruisers were hit in the first 3 minutes. Their shields held for seconds. Then the swarm's harvesters latched on, and the ships began to come apart, piece by piece, consumed while their crews screamed on open channels. Theska ordered a retreat. The fleet pulled back. They had lost 2 ships and damaged 6 more. They had not destroyed a single swarm unit. Panic hit the Senate like a wave. Delegates shouted over each other. Some demanded more ships. Others demanded negotiations, even though every expert in the chamber knew the swarm did not communicate. Yulan stood at the center of it all, his glow flickering wildly, calling for order that would not come. Draven waited. He sat through 2 hours of chaos, watching, taking notes, saying nothing. Priya looked at him several times, but she had stopped asking questions. She was beginning to understand. When the shouting reached its peak, Draven stood. He walked to the microphone at his delegation's desk and pressed the request button for emergency speaking rights. The system chimed. The chamber went quiet, not out of respect, but out of surprise. The human had not spoken publicly in weeks. Most of them had forgotten he was there. The Speaker of the Senate, a Holith named Vane, granted the request. "Ambassador Call, you have 5 minutes." Draven walked down the steps to the speaking platform. He moved slowly, deliberately, the way he always did, the way a man who had survived 100 dangerous rooms had learned to move. He carried a single data tablet. He set it on the podium. He looked up at the hundreds of faces staring down at him. He did not raise his voice. 3 weeks ago, High Arbiter Yulan Vor stood on this platform and told you that Deathworld species were dangerous. He showed you images of Earth's predators. He showed you our wars. He made you afraid of us, and many of you applauded. Silence. Today, you are afraid of something else. The Wraith swarm has consumed Shimmering Reach. 18 million Velith are dead. Your fleet engaged and was forced to retreat in minutes. Admiral Theska is a fine officer, but she was given ships crewed by species who have never fought a predator, who have never been hunted, who have never known what it feels like to be prey. He tapped the tablet. The display above the platform changed. It showed a timeline, 200 years of conquered military history, every major conflict, every existential threat. Beside each event was a simple chart showing which species had provided combat forces. "This is your own history," Draven said. "Your own records. I did not create this data. I simply organized it so that everyone in this chamber could see what, until now, has been very easy to ignore." He pointed to the first entry. The Kethai's expansion, 412 years ago. The Dreven lost 31% of their fleet defending conquered space. No Cradle World species deployed combat vessels. He pointed to the next. The Sarathi Pirate Wars, 309 years ago. The Goreth boarded enemy stations in close combat. 1,400 Goreth soldiers died. No Cradle World species participated in ground operations. He moved through the list, entry after entry. The same pattern: Deathworld species fighting, Cradle World species funding, voting, and watching from a safe distance. "In the 12 years since humanity joined this conquered," Draven said, "human ships have responded to 9 emergency military calls, more than any other species in the same period. We did this as provisional members with limited fleet rights because we were asked and because we said yes." He set the tablet down. High Arbiter Yulan Vor proposed the Deathworld containment provision to protect this conquered from species like mine. He called us dangerous animals. He said we needed to be controlled. Draven looked up at Yulan, who sat rigid in his seat, his glow almost entirely gone. "Arbiter Vor, the Wraith Swarm is at your doorstep. Your fleet cannot stop it. Your admirals are retreating. 2 of your colony systems are next, and after that, the swarm will keep moving until it runs out of things to eat." He paused. The silence in the chamber was total. "You have 2 choices. You can activate the Deathworld fleets, human, Dreven, and Goreth, and let us do what our worlds built us to do. Or you can watch the swarm consume your civilization while the species you chain stand by and do nothing, because you told them they were too dangerous to trust." He stepped back from the podium. "The choice is yours, but I will tell you this. On Earth, when a fire starts, we do not ask the firefighter to be polite. We ask them to walk into the flames. That is what we are offering. Walk into the flames for you, again, as we always have." He returned to his seat. The chamber was silent for 10 full seconds. Then Muraxi Thal stood slowly, her scarred body rising like a monument. The Goreth delegation stood with her, the floor vibrating under their weight. 3 Deathworld species, on their feet waiting. Yulan looked at them. He looked at the battle feed still playing on the secondary screens, showing the swarm spreading toward the next system. He looked at the empty seats where representatives from Shimmering Reach would never sit again. His hands trembled. His voice was barely a whisper when he spoke. "Authorization granted. Deploy the Deathworld fleets." Draven was already moving. He opened a channel to Earth before Yulan had finished speaking. The message was short. It did not need to be long. "Condition Omega. All fleets, all assets. Humanity is going hunting." Across a dozen star systems, human warships woke up. They were not beautiful ships. They were not elegant. They were armored, scarred, built by a species that had always known the universe was trying to kill them. Their engines burned hot. Their weapons were oversized. Their crews were already at battle stations because human crews never really left them. The galaxy had called them animals. Now the galaxy was begging them to bare their teeth. The Deathworld fleets arrived in the Valen system 31 hours after Yulan's authorization. They came from 3 directions, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in staggered waves, and the conquered observation ships that were watching from a safe distance went silent on their channels for almost a full minute. They had never seen anything like it. The Goreth came first. Their ships were enormous dreadnoughts built from the same dense, silicon-rich materials as their homeworld. They were not fast, they were not graceful. They looked like asteroids that someone had bolted engines and weapons onto, and that was not far from the truth. The Goreth did not believe in elegance. They believed in mass. Their fleet doctrine was simple: get close, absorb damage, and crush whatever was in front of them. They had been doing this for 500 years, and they were very good at it. The Driven came second. Their ships were the opposite: sleek, dark, and hard to see. Driven technology specialized in sensor dampening and cloaking systems developed over 8 centuries of conquered service. Their fleet appeared on scanners as ghosts, flickering in and out of detection, never quite where you expected them to be. They fought like their ancestors had fought on Ashfall, from ambush, from shadow, with surgical precision that left enemies dead before they understood they were being attacked. The humans came last. Their fleet was the smallest of the three, but it drew the most attention. Human ships were ugly by galactic standards. They were covered in thick armor plating, studded with weapon emplacements, and built with redundant systems stacked on top of redundant systems. Every human ship was designed around a single philosophy: this ship will keep fighting after it should have stopped. The Cradle World observers noticed something else too. The human ships were modified. In the 31 hours since the order was given, human engineers had already been welding new equipment onto their hulls: signal jammers, reinforced boarding hatches, and something the observers could not identify that glowed faintly blue along the spine of every vessel. Draven coordinated from the bridge of the UNS Perseverance, a heavy cruiser that served as the human flagship. He had not slept since the Senate session. His staff had tried to convince him to rest, and he had looked at them with an expression that ended the conversation. He stood at the central command table, watching the tactical display as the 3 fleets moved into position. Beside him, via holographic link, stood Muraxi Thal and Goreth War Chief Brecken, a massive being whose stone-like face showed no expression but whose deep voice carried an energy that Draven had learned to recognize as eagerness. "The swarm has split into 3 clusters," Draven said, pointing to the display. "One is moving toward Valen Prime. One is consuming the outer moons. The third is holding position near the system star, likely recharging. Muraxi, your fleet takes the outer moons. Brecken, you take the cluster at the star. My fleet will handle Valen Prime." Brecken rumbled, "You take the largest cluster for yourself." "We have something we want to test," Draven said. "What?" "You'll see." Muraxi's hologram flickered as she gave her own orders in rapid Draven. She looked back at Draven. "My ships are ready. We will be invisible until we are not." "That's what I'm counting on." The battle began at 3:47 station time, and it was unlike anything the Conquered had ever witnessed. Brecken's Goreth dreadnoughts drove straight into the swarm cluster near the star. There was no flanking, no maneuvering, no clever positioning. The Goreth simply accelerated to full speed and hit the swarm like a wall of stone hitting water. The impact was staggering. Swarm units shattered against Goreth hulls. The dreadnought's forward batteries fired continuously, massive kinetic rounds that punched through biomechanical flesh and kept going. When swarm harvesters latched onto Goreth ships, the Goreth did not try to shake them off. They simply kept pushing forward, dragging the harvesters with them, grinding them against the hulls until they broke apart. A Conquered observer, a Pelari science officer, watched from a monitoring station and whispered to his colleague, "They are not fighting the swarm. They are walking through it." At the outer moons, Muraxi's Driven fleet materialized out of nothing. One moment the swarm cluster was feeding undisturbed. The next, 24 Driven warships were among them, firing from point-blank range, targeting the nerve nodes that connected swarm units to the hive mind. The Driven did not stay still long enough to be targeted. They fired, cloaked, repositioned, and fired again. Each strike was precise. Each withdrawal was calculated. The swarm cluster tried to reform, tried to adapt, but the Driven had 800 years of experience fighting enemies that outnumbered them. They knew how to make a smaller force feel like a larger one. And at Valen Prime, the humans did something that no one expected. They jammed the swarm's communications. The blue devices along the spines of the human ships activated simultaneously, flooding the local space with a broad-spectrum signal that targeted the specific frequency the Wraith swarm used to coordinate its hive mind. Human engineers had identified this frequency during analysis of the swarm's initial attack on Shimmering Reach, working around the clock to develop a countermeasure. It was not perfect. It was rough, improvised, built in hours instead of years. But it worked. The swarm cluster at Valen Prime stopped moving. For 12 seconds, the biomechanical ships simply drifted, disconnected from each other, their coordination shattered. 12 seconds did not sound like much, but 12 seconds was enough. The human fleet opened fire with everything it had. Missiles, kinetic rounds, energy weapons, all concentrated on a swarm that could no longer dodge as a unified organism. Individual swarm units tried to react, but without the hive mind, they were clumsy and confused. They collided with each other. They fired at empty space. They broke apart under concentrated human firepower like ice under a hammer. Then the boarding parties launched. 42 human marine dropships crossed the gap between the fleet and the largest remaining swarm structure, a hive node the size of a small city. The Cradle World observers could not believe what they were seeing. No species had ever intentionally boarded a Wraith swarm structure. The interior of a hive node was a nightmare of living walls, acidic atmosphere, and defensive organisms designed to digest intruders. The humans went in anyway. They went in wearing heavy combat suits built for environments that would kill an unprotected human in seconds. They carried weapons designed for close-quarters combat, short-range energy cutters, kinetic shotguns, explosive charges. They moved in teams of 4, clearing corridors that pulsed and shifted around them, killing defensive organisms that lunged from walls and ceilings. It was brutal, it was terrifying, it was methodical. A Dreven officer who was monitoring human communications turned to her captain and said, "They are not panicking. Their heart rates are elevated, but their communication is calm. They are treating this like a job." Her captain, a veteran of 40 years of Dreven military service, replied, "That is because, to them, it is. Their species has been walking into dark places and killing what they found there since before they had language. This is what they were made for." Inside the hive node, the marine teams found the central coordination cluster, the biological core that linked the node to the rest of the swarm. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez, a woman from a small town in Argentina who had joined the military at 18 because she wanted to see the stars, planted the charges herself. Her suit was damaged. The acidic air was leaking through a crack in her helmet seal. She had maybe 10 minutes before the exposure became dangerous. She planted the charges in 4. The hive node detonated from the inside out. The shockwave rippled through the swarm cluster, and the human jamming signal amplified the chaos. Without the hive node, the remaining swarm units at Valen Prime became truly independent for the first time, and they did not know how to function alone. They scattered. They fled. Draven ordered the jamming frequency shared with the Dreven and Gorath fleets. Within hours, it was active across all 3 battle zones. The effect was devastating. The swarm, which had terrorized the galaxy for 6 centuries, was being taken apart by 3 species from worlds that had tried to kill them every day of their existence. By hour 38 of the battle, it was over. The Wraith swarm, what remained of it, retreated. It pulled back from the Valen system, then from the outer systems, then from conquered space entirely. It fled into the deep void between stars, wounded and fragmented, its hive mind disrupted in ways that might take generations to repair. The conquered observation ships recorded everything. The footage would be watched by every species in the galaxy within days. Draven stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, looking out at the space where the battle had been. Debris floated everywhere, shattered swarm units, twisted metal, frozen atmosphere from breached compartments. Valen Prime was still there. Its cities were damaged but standing. Its people were alive. He thought about Shimmering Reach, the world they had not saved, the 18 million Velith who had died while the Senate debated, and Yulan glowed with pride. Priya came to stand beside him. She looked exhausted. She looked changed. "We lost 11 ships," she said. 243 crew. The Gorath lost 8 ships. The Dreven lost 5. Draven nodded. Every number was a person. He would learn their names. He always did. He opened a channel to Meraxi. Her scarred face appeared on the screen. She looked tired too, but her gold eyes were steady. "It is done," he said. She studied him through the screen. "No, now comes the harder part." "I know." "Do you?" Because the swarm was an enemy everyone could see. What comes next is an enemy that smiles and shakes your hand and votes to chain you while thanking you for your service. Draven looked at the debris field one more time. Then he looked back at her. "I've dealt with that kind before. We all have. That's the other thing about Earth, Senator. We didn't just learn to fight predators. We learned to survive politics." Meraxi made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Then rest, Ambassador. You will need it." He closed the channel. He sat down in his chair for the first time in 46 hours. He did not sleep yet. He stared at the stars outside the bridge windows and thought about what came next. The galaxy owed its survival to the species it had tried to cage. Now it would have to decide what that meant. And Draven knew, from a lifetime of experience, that gratitude was the most fragile thing in the universe. It never lasted. But it could be useful if you spent it at the right moment. The Senate reconvened on a Tuesday, 11 days after the Wraith swarm retreated from conquered space. The chamber looked different now. Not physically. The curved rows of seats were the same. The soft shifting lights on the ceiling were the same. The speaking platform at the center was the same. But the feeling in the room had changed in a way that everyone could sense and no one wanted to name. There were empty seats. Not many, but enough to notice. The delegates from Shimmering Reach would never return. Their section had been draped in pale cloth, a Velith tradition of mourning, and small bioluminescent flowers had been placed on each chair by surviving members of their families who had been living on other worlds when the swarm came. The flowers glowed faintly in the dim light of the chamber, a quiet reminder that 18 million people had died, while this Senate debated containment provisions and voted on leashes. In the gallery above the Senate floor, there were visitors who had never been allowed in before. Velith civilians from the Valen system, survivors, people who had watched from shelters as the sky turned dark and the swarm descended, and who had been pulled out alive by Deathworld soldiers. Some of them were bandaged. Some of them were children. They sat quietly and watched the proceedings with large, luminous eyes. Draven took his seat in the human section. He had slept for the first time in 3 days. He had shaved, put on a clean diplomatic uniform, and eaten a meal he barely tasted. He looked like himself again, calm and still, but Priya noticed that something in his eyes was different. Harder. Not angry but resolved, the way metal looks after it has been through a forge. Yulan Vor entered the chamber last. He walked slowly, and his bioluminescence was muted, a dull blue instead of the vibrant gold he usually wore. He took his seat at the High Arbiter's podium and called the session to order with a voice that lacked the musical confidence it had carried 3 weeks ago. "This session has been called to address the aftermath of the Wraith swarm incursion and to revisit certain pending legislative matters," Yulan said. He paused. He looked down at his notes. "I will begin." The chamber waited. "The Deathworld containment provision, which I introduced before this body, is hereby withdrawn." A murmur passed through the Senate. Some delegates nodded. Others sat in uncomfortable silence. Yulan continued. "The strategic landscape has changed. The provision, as written, is no longer viable given the current security requirements of the conquered. The Deathworld species performed admirably during the crisis, and their contributions are noted in the official record." He said it like he was reading a report. Like the deaths and the battles and the Marines walking into living nightmares were items on a list. His glow flickered once, then steadied. Let it also be noted that the conquered fleet performed to the best of its capabilities, and that the initial engagement under Admiral Theska was conducted in accordance with standard doctrine. The situation was unprecedented, and no blame should be assigned. He set his notes down. That concludes my remarks. He sat, the chamber was quiet. The Cradle World delegates shifted in their seats. The Velith civilians in the gallery did not react. They simply watched. And then Murexi Thal stood. She did not request speaking rights. She did not press a button or wait for permission. She simply rose from her seat in the Dreven section, and the sound of her chair scraping backward cut through the silence like a blade. She was old. Her movements were slow, deliberate, heavy with the weight of a body that had been fighting its own planet's gravity for over 2 centuries. Her scales were dark, her scars were pale, and her golden eyes were fixed on the speaking platform below. She walked down the steps. Every eye in the chamber followed her. The Speaker of the Senate, Vane, opened his mouth to object to the breach of protocol, looked at Muraxi's face and closed it again. Muraxi reached the platform. She stood where Yulan had stood when he mocked Deathworlders. She stood where Draven had stood when he showed the galaxy its own history. She placed her scarred hands on the podium and looked up at the Senate. She did not speak right away. She let the silence build. She had learned patience on a world where the wrong sound at the wrong moment meant death, and she understood the power of making a room wait. "I have been a member of this Senate for 147 years, she said. Her voice was low, rough, like stone grinding against stone. In that time, I have spoken from this platform exactly twice. Once, when my people petitioned for expanded mining rights in the Kel Nebula. Once, when I objected to a trade tariff that was designed to punish Deathworld economies. Both times I was outvoted." She looked around the chamber. "I did not speak when Arbiter Yulan introduced his containment provision. I did not speak when this chamber applauded his insults. I did not speak when the Wraith swarm arrived, because by then, speaking was no longer necessary. The truth spoke for itself." She turned to face Yulan directly. He sat perfectly still, his glow almost invisible. "Arbiter Vor, you have spent your career studying Deathworld species. You have measured our aggression. You have cataloged our violence. You have written papers and given speeches about the danger we represent. You have built policies to contain us, and you have done all of this from the safety of a world where nothing has ever tried to eat you." She paused. 3 weeks ago you stood here and showed this Senate images of Earth. You showed them wolves, sharks, crocodiles, snakes. You showed them every predator that walks and swims and crawls on that remarkable, terrible planet. And you used those images to argue that humans were brutes, that they were shaped by violence and could never be trusted. She stepped closer to Yulan's section, and her voice dropped lower. "But you missed the most important thing about Earth, Arbiter. The thing that anyone from a Deathworld would have seen immediately." The chamber was so quiet that Draven could hear the faint hum of the station's life support systems. On Earth, the humans were not the prey. They were the apex predator. Every creature you showed on that screen, every wolf, every shark, every great cat, every venomous serpent, the humans hunted them all. They hunted them with rocks. They hunted them with spears. They hunted them with traps and fire and patience. They drove species to the edge of extinction. They killed things 10 times their size. They climbed to the top of a food chain that had been trying to kill them since the day they climbed down from the trees. She turned to face the full Senate. And then they did something that no other species on their world had ever done, something that to this day I find extraordinary. They chose to protect the very creatures that had hunted them. They built reserves and sanctuaries. They wrote laws to save animals that had eaten their children. They mourned the extinction of predators that had been their enemies for 1,000,000 years, because humans do not just conquer, they also care. And that combination, The ability to kill anything and the choice not to is what makes them the most remarkable species this conquered has ever admitted. She turned back to Yulan. She looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who has missed the lesson entirely. You mocked the power of Deathworlders, Arbiter. You listed the predators that shared Earth with humanity. You thought that proved humans were dangerous. She leaned forward. Her golden eyes caught the light and held it. But I have a question for you. The chamber held its breath. Did any of them ever hunt you back? Yulan did not answer. His bioluminescence went completely dark, something that, in Velith physiology, meant total surrender, total defeat. He looked down at his hands. He had no words left. Meraxi held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then she turned to the human section, where Draven sat with his hands folded on the desk, the same way he had sat on the day this all began. She inclined her head, a slow, deliberate bow. Among the Draven, this gesture was reserved for warriors who had earned respect through endurance, through sacrifice, through the quiet refusal to break. It was not given lightly. It had not been given to a non-Draven in living memory. Draven stood. He returned the gesture, bowing his head to the same depth, holding it for the same duration. The chamber watched in silence as 2 predators, from 2 different hellworlds separated by 1,000 light years, acknowledged each other as equals. The session continued after that, but the real moment was over. The containment provision was dead. In its place, a new resolution was drafted over the following days, the Mutual Defense Covenant, which placed Deathworld species at the core of the Conquered's military structure, not as tools or weapons or attack dogs on leashes, but as equal partners with full authority and full rights. Humanity's provisional membership was upgraded to permanent status. The Draven and Gorath received formal recognition for centuries of service that had never been properly acknowledged. Yulan Vor resigned from the Security Council 1 week later. He did not give a speech. He did not make a statement. He simply left, and the corridor where he had once walked with such pride was just a corridor again. Draven returned to his quarters that evening. He sat at his desk and looked out the window at the stars. He was tired in a way that sleep could not fix, the tiredness of a man who had carried something heavy for a long time and had just set it down. There was a message waiting on his terminal, from Meraxi. It read, "Welcome to the galaxy, Predator. Try not to break it." He smiled. It was a real smile, the first one in weeks, and it reached his eyes. He typed a reply, "No promises." He closed the terminal. He dimmed the lights. He sat in the quiet of his room, on a station built by species who had never known what it meant to be hunted, and he thought about Earth, about the wolves and the sharks and the long, patient hunts across savannas that stretched to the horizon, about the persistence that had carried his species from caves to stars, about the people who had laughed at humans in this very station, and the people who would never laugh at them again. He slept. And far away in the black void between galaxies where light had never reached, the remnants of the Wraith swarm drifted in wounded silence. The hive mind was fractured, scattered, struggling to reconnect across distances it had never had to cross before. It had consumed worlds for 600 years. It had faced fleets and swallowed them. It had never been defeated. Until now. The fragments of the hive mind pulsed with something new. A signal, repeating, spreading from unit to unit across the void. It was not a word because the swarm did not use words. It was a sensation, a biological warning encoded in the deepest layer of its collective memory, triggered for the first time in its existence. It was the feeling of being prey. It was fear. And it would remember.